Okay, good afternoon, everyone. The arrivals into the room look like they're starting to slow down a little bit. So whilst my colleague Sam continues to let people in, we'll just make a start. So welcome everybody to today's webinar. My name's James Baker. I'm the Director of Digital Humanities at the University of Southampton, and with my colleague Kiri Ross-Jones, who's a Senior Archivist at the Royal Botanic Gardens at Kew, we're really delighted to welcome you to this webinar on plant histories, records and mobilities, a shared perspective. This webinar has been organised between Kew Gardens and Southampton Digital Humanities, and it's supported by the Higher Education Innovation Funding. And it's part of a kind of new collaboration that we've started aimed at kind of building a shared understanding of plant records as data. And later this year, that will see a PhD student join us to work on mapping plants and seeds and other botanicals that entered and exited the Kew's collections in the long 19th century and now captured in their archival records that we think have the potential to open up kind of complex histories of people, trans-continental and longitudinal networks of science, and colonial access to land and other natural resources. So we have a wonderful collection of speakers here today, and before we hand over to them, I just want to allow Kiri talk a little bit about the collections at Kew, which means I need to stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, James. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay? Yeah, great, perfect. Sharing my slides. So, hi everyone. As James said, I'm the Senior Archivist at Kew Gardens. As an archivist, I'm always keen to talk about my collection, so I thought I'd give you all a really quick introduction to the type of records that we hold at Kew, and also a little bit on the specific collection around which our collaboration focuses. So Kew's archives contain the official record of the gardens, as well as personal papers of individuals connected with the history of botany. And with our library and illustrations collections, the archives form a really comprehensive resource relating to botany and history of science. In the library, we have about 320,000 printed items. In illustrations, we have 200,000 items. In archives, the part I look after, we think if you counted every piece of paper, we have 7 million pieces of paper, which sounds immense. It's quite big, but it's about 2 kilometres of archives, and all of our collections are constantly growing. Hopefully that slide has moved on and is now showing you some images from our collections. Our archives date mostly from the mid-19th century onwards, when Kew came under public ownership, although there are some earlier items in the collection. They consist of official corporate papers, such as the miscellaneous reports, of which there's an image in the middle of the slide there, which documents Kew's interactions with botanic gardens and stations in what were then colonised areas, mostly about economically valuable plants. You can see kind of sugar, tea, tobacco volumes there. We hold huge series of directors' correspondence, and on the top right of the slide, there's an image there of a letter from Beatrix Potter to Kew's director. We also hold personal papers, such as Joseph Dalton Hooker's papers before he became director at Kew when he travelled in the Himalayas, and that's his little notebook that he took to the Himalayas and made a sketch in down on the bottom left of the slide. Then the top left, we have some notes and sketches by Elsie Wakefield, who was a mycologist at Kew in the early 20th century. So this slide talks a little bit about what we do in Library and Archives, which is the team that I'm part of. We have a public reading room in which anyone can come and use our collections and have a wide user base. This includes Kew's own researchers, but also many international kind of researchers come and visit us too. We also have other audiences, such as family historians, people from the commercial sector, artists, community groups, that kind of thing. So it's really varied user base. We have an active programme of arts and humanities research, and this is something we've been really trying to build up over the last couple of years, with staff in Library and Archive supervising PhD students, also being actively involved in research projects. We're involved in a couple of digital projects and dabbled a bit with some kind of research projects around this, but for a long time have been really keen to work with the digital humanities department And that's one of the reasons why we're so excited by this collaboration with Southampton and James that has allowed us to do this. As you can probably guess from that previous slide showing some of the collections, many of our records document colonial botany and appropriation of natural resources. We have a strong commitment to looking at this history and to transparency over this through detailed archive research, but also by making our collections fully accessible, which again is something this collaborative project contributes to. So this image here is of the series of the Goods Inwards and Outwards books, and is the one that's at the heart of this collaborative project. The volumes record plant exchanges that Kew made from 1793 up to the 1980s, and it's actually our longest running series in the archives. And through these volumes, we can trace the introduction and movements of plants around the globe. There are kind of records of breadfruit plant coming in from the Caribbean and being sent to Tahiti and also to Kew. Fruit trees being sent from Kew to Sierra Leone to establish the colony there. Records of rubber plants coming from Brazil to Kew and then being sent out to Singapore to start the rubber industry there. There are many kind of varied histories in these volumes. However, this slide here shows some of the text inside the volumes. As you can see, it's pretty difficult to read. The volumes are quite inaccessible. They're mostly not digitised, not available online, and you can't search them by plant name. So these histories really at the moment are remaining hidden. Back in lockdown, we had a project with the University of Southampton and volunteers from University of the Third Age to transcribe the very first volume in the series, which dates from 1793. It took a team of 20 volunteers about 7 months to do this 400-page volume. You can see their transcription there, which is now hosted in the Biodiversity Heritage Library. The volunteers were retired people from U3A, and they weren't trying to work or homeschool, so they were able to contribute lots of time in lockdown on this project. It was very time-intensive a project for them. And that's why I've been so excited to work on this project with Sam, who's going to be talking later, who's been looking at different ways of liberating the information held in these volumes, kind of using digital tools and making them much more accessible. Yeah, so I'm sure you'll all enjoy hearing about that. Okay, so that's it from me. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks so much, Kerry, for giving us an overview of kind of why we're here today to talk about plant histories, records, and mobilities, and an overview of what the rich archives that Kew has. So I'm just going to go through the speakers we have today before we hand over to them. We have 4 speakers, each of whom will be speaking for around 10 minutes before we open up for a general Q&A. First, we have my colleague John McAleer, who will speak to the topic of a young slip of botany, South Atlantic botanical networks and Britain's Asian Empire. John is an associate professor of history here at the University of Southampton, and his research explores history of British Empire in its global and maritime contexts. We'll then hand to another one of my colleagues here at Southampton, Nathan Bosso, whose talk is entitled Traditions and Technologies Uncontaining the West African Kola Nut, which builds on his work as a research fellow here in history and his expertise at the intersection of science, medicine, museums, environment, and African studies. Third, we'll have Caroline Cornish from Kew, who will speak to the topic of convict labour and the Botanic Garden, using objects and archives to trace the contributions of captive labourers. Caroline is the Humanities Research Coordinator at the Royal Botanic Gardens and has research interests that include histories of science, of empire and colonialism, botanic gardens, museums and collections. And finally, as Kiri noted, Sam Pegg will discuss the topic Goods Inwards and Outwards, using Royal Botanic Gardens Kew's record books to benchmark transcribus in understanding plant history data. Sam is a PhD student at University of Southampton, as well as a digital humanities technician, and his research explores how working with AI affects human creativity. Sam has also very ably organised this webinar, for which Kiri and I are enormously grateful, and as you'll hear, has been working with us over the last few months to understand the possibilities of using plant records as data and unlocking them from the handwritten archive. Before we get going, just a few notes of housekeeping. You'll have seen, hopefully when you came in, that this seminar is being recorded. This is so we can put an edited version of the webinar online afterwards. Please do use the Q&A function in Teams. You'll see that somewhere in your top bar with the words Q&A and some little bubbles with question marks. That's where you can pose questions that we'll come to at the end. If you want to put those as we're going along, that's great. If you want to wait till the end, that's fine as well. And we'll try to pick those up at the end. Depending on the number of questions, we may not be able to cover all of them, but we'll do our best to pick out the themes. And if anyone really wants to speak, then please do note that in the Q&A, and we're happy to unmute you so you can ask your question in that way if you want to. And finally, please be respectful throughout and know that we will take a zero tolerance approach to any comments or questions we deem to be harmful. And so with that, I will hand over to John to share his screen and get us started.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, James, and thanks to Kiri for convening this webinar. And let me add my thanks to Sam as well for making it all happen. So now I hope that I continue the run of success by being able to share. Brilliant. Thanks, James. So yeah, as James mentioned, I'm an historian of empire. Many of you on this call will know that I'm interested in ships, or rather the possibilities that ships provide for creating networks. And so that's what I want to talk about today for about 10 minutes or so. The historian of science, Jim Endersby, has remarked that correspondence networks, such as those forged by plant collectors, were, quote, the single most important tool of the imperial scientific endeavour. Because these plant collectors exchanged ideas and specimens readily, acknowledging that botanical science could be best advanced by the pooling of knowledge. And the British capture of the Cape of Good Hope from the Dutch in 1795 in the early years of the wars against revolutionary France and her allies offered increased opportunities for British botanists to study and collect there. So in this really brief paper, I guess I want to use this as a case study to explore how the relationship between British botany and South African plants was altered by the British takeover at the Cape. And then more broadly, really, I want to use this case study as a way to kind of suggest or assess some of the impacts of empire on science and on botany in general, the ways in which the objectives and practices of botany in particular were inflected by changing political and strategic circumstances in the period. So to kind of think about the way in which plant networks and plant biographies and the kind of records and archives that Kiri mentioned can help us to inform broader histories of empire and colonialism. So in the very brief time allocated to us, I want to touch on these three themes, which I hope combine to give us a sense of the ways in which botanical networks and institutions were nurtured, if you forgive the pun, in this part of the world. So one of the first things to say is that this part of the world, Southern Africa, the South Atlantic, the Southern Indian Ocean, continued to do what had already been happening under the Dutch. In other words, it continued to forge its own networks, creating alternative axes of exchange and movements by virtue of its position, as you can see here, as a kind of nodal point for specimen transfer and knowledge exchange. The Cape of Good Hope at the very southern tip of Africa rapidly became an important centre in its own right. And I want to suggest to you that it kind of could sustain networks that could often bypass London scientific circles, either going back to Britain through more informal channels or moving to other parts of the empire. And in this way, and kind of in a play on Carl Linnaeus's words, it kind of became a commonwealth of botany in and of itself. So British officials in the East India Company's service were very quick to identify the possibilities offered by the acquisition of this African base. This man, William Roxburgh, was the superintendent of the company's gardens in Calcutta, and he wasn't about to miss an opportunity to botanize at the Cape. He recognized immediately the region's potential for progressing the work of his own institution. While politicians and officials in London recognised or explored the possibilities for recruiting troops, for example, Roxburgh saw the chance to acquire some useful additions to his botanical establishment. So when Lieutenant John Owen was dispatched by the Bengal Presidency to the Cape to recruit soldiers for its army from the Dutch garrison there in 1797, Roxburgh slipped a note to him, losing no time in contacting the army man. As Owen recalled, Roxburgh wrote to him asking him to, quote, make a collection of any curious plants, flowers, bulbs, or seeds that I might meet with during my residence at the Cape of Good Hope, and forward them to Sir John Shore, who was the Governor General at Fort William in Calcutta. And later, when Roxburgh himself travelled to Britain, he left his son John, whom Lady Anne Barnard called a young slip of botany, in case you're wondering where the title for the paper comes from. He left his son there at the Cape to collect for the father, William Roxburgh's gardens here in Calcutta that you can see on the screen. And networks were not just restricted to the Cape. A group of local inhabitants on this island, St Helena, informed a contact in India that they were at the crossroads of maritime networks. And I've got a couple of quotes here. The first one, you can see, we think the situation on this island is peculiarly well adapted to render it an intermediate nursery for the preservation of such plants as may not have the strength to endure the whole course of the voyage to Europe or to the Eastern world. And in his account of the island, Major Rennet described the wild almond tree of Bengal, which he said was originally from Java, growing in the neat small garden of the governor's house. And in a sign of the multiple botanical influences that affected the island, Henry Porteous tried the productions of the warm climate of India in the late 18th century. You can see his quote here that he says he is now naturalizing trees and shrubs which came from India in the garden in James's Valley, where in a short time I trust there will be a fine collection. The soil and climate seem so peculiarly well adapted to Eastern productions. So much for networks between the Cape and St Helena and India and other parts of the empire. What about fixed establishments? Well, echoing the attention paid to Kew by Joseph Banks, the interest of various governors in South Africa, and particularly in the Dutch East India Company's gardens at Cape Town, highlights the changing attitudes of British administrators to the botanical riches of Southern Africa and the Cape Colony's place in Britain's scientific empire. As Britain's political control of the Cape became more secure, the garden received more attention with the appointment of this man, George Lord Macartney, in 1797. According to Robert Percival, who was an army captain, Macartney ordered the garden, got a slide of it here, the company's garden, to be, quote, replanted and laid out, while simultaneously procuring, quote, a great number of very curious plants from Asia, Europe, Africa, and South America, most of which thrived very well. Our man William Roxburgh, again, hoped that the botanical garden at the Cape would be reinvigorated by the British. When he arrived at the Cape on his way back to Britain, he brought, quote, many fine plants in the highest order on shore with me. So he was both hoping to collect from the Cape, but also to bring plants from India to the Cape. With these specimens, Roxburgh hoped to induce Macartney to establish or recommend establishing a small botanic garden here. There already was one, so he was able to kind of promote that. And Roxburgh's vision for the botanical gardens in Africa was much more wide-ranging than simply as a place from which to gather specimens. He was attuned to that Banksian view of the value of botanic gardens. We may then, if this place remains in our possession, which it more or less did, soon hope to see all the plants of the east carried westward and those of the west brought eastward. Roxburgh saw the Cape sitting at the heart of a network, supplying and being supplied from further afield. A small garden establishment there at the Cape, in other words, would be of infinite use to us, a resting place for plants to recoup at from India to Europe and the West Indies, and from these countries again to our colonies to the eastward of the Cape, and for forwarding the plants of the Cape itself. So in other words, in this scheme, the Cape would become the centre of its own network, bypassing London and creating an alternative hub of botanical activity. A few years later, Sir George Macartney, that you can see here, Sir George Young succeeded Lord Macartney as governor, and Young's blueprint for the botanical exploration and exploitation again drew on Banksian ideas of utility, but also provided new locally based impetus and rationale for such activities. Now, Young's career had followed a really interesting trajectory since he'd been Secretary at War. He'd come up with all sorts of weird and wonderful schemes for founding theatres and masquerade rooms at the Cape of Good Hope, which didn't do his reputation at all good, particularly with Marquis Wellesley, who was the Governor General in India. However, his schemes in relation to botanical gardens seemed to go down much, much better. He was interested in agricultural improvements, in scientific advances, and he situated plant exchanges and botanical research at the heart of his strategy for the colony's development. He had grand designs in mind which would have connected the Cape with other areas of the empire on an economic basis, bypassing the imperial metropolis in a similar way to that envisaged by Roxburgh. So just as Sir Joseph Banks envisaged Kew as, quote, a great botanical exchange house for the empire, Young envisaged something similar for the Cape. He wrote to Sir Stephen Lushington in May 1799, expressing his belief that as governor of the Cape, it is my duty and my intention to restore and improve the botanical gardens here. And his plans were linked to wider questions of what purpose the Cape might serve as a hub of empire. In this quote, it appears to me that a botanical garden at the Cape may become what the situation and valuable productions render it qualified for, the centre of union, correspondence and connection with every part of the globe for the purposes of useful science. Young envisaged a connection between these different gardens with the result that by a communication of the contents of each garden, mutual aid may be given to all, the benefits to be derived, and promised to contribute not only to articles of ornament, in other words, decorative uses of aesthetic purposes, but of domestic viability of food, medicine, and of commerce. So my third and final point, it relates to an idea of botany as a kind of genteel pastime. So botany and botanical networks and botanical gardens, of course, were not only the preserve of London-based men of science. Interest in the pursuit of botany extended well beyond Banksian scholarly circles, you might say. And the exploration of informal scientific networks has also, I think, the potential to revise significantly our view of colonial science, especially in its early phases. We know that botanical endeavour among the new and kind of recently arrived political elite at the Cape and St Helena provided interesting insights into the way in which botanizing was kind of translated to the setting of the colonial community and how it changed in response to greater political involvement of Britain in the region. So just two very brief examples here. First of all, Lady Anne Barnard, she of the Young Slip quote, she was part of a kind of network of botanical enthusiasts. She was in constant correspondence with Henry Dundas, a former suitor, also a government minister, but somebody in our context was much more interested in acquiring plants from the Cape. She wrote to Henry Dundas's wife, saying that she dug up a few bulbs, which I send to you, admitting that she didn't know if they'd be any good or not, but the colour was, quote, bright and handsome. And I've accompanied them with a few seeds, which I can't vouch for, except that the seed is good. And then she went on to talk about the difficulties of getting these seeds back to Britain. I'm not sure if they'll survive because I'm not possessed of the knowledge of how to make a proper botanical box for the sea conveyance. So she tells us something of the practical challenges and difficulties of kind of creating these botanical networks, of moving these seeds around the world. And then finally, this lady, sorry for the pixelated slide, but Henrietta Lady Clive, she was accompanying her husband, who had been made governor of Madras in 1797. The Clives arrived in Table Bay at the beginning of June 1798, and the family enjoyed the fact that they could ramble about all day hunting for plants. And in a letter to her brother, the Earl of Powis, she recorded, "The place is beautiful, with all sorts of the most beautiful plants growing wild. I believe in summer it would be charming. We find everybody civil, and I am going on to India with a great quantity of plants." So let me try and draw things to a conclusion and bring some final points together. Trade, empire, and botany do not, I think, map easily or directly or neatly across onto each other. Interpretations of a kind of unified imperial vision of botanical development and control directed from Kew by Sir Joseph Banks are not really sustainable. And I think one of the things that all of our projects are kind of teasing out is the kind of multiplicity of these networks. And I think there is an existence of diverse, overlapping networks of botanical exchange, which suggests that it might be better to think about early colonial science as a kind of polycentric communications network, rather than simply as a wheel with Sir Joseph Banks or the East India Company's court of directors at the centre. The local and the particular, in the case of my case study today, the Cape of Good Hope, are, I think, equally as important considerations, and they're often ignored, I think, by historians like me, who kind of talk about more overarching theories of centralizing control. And I think the example of the Cape, and hopefully you can maybe see in your own work how that can be scaled up or translated to other parts of the world, but that example illustrates how peripheral, so-called peripheral area, a kind of young slip, if you want, in scientific terms, developed and matured through a combination of factors, political and social, as well as scientific and botanical, to become this locus of botanical activity, sustaining the sorts of institutions that Joseph Banks had supported in London, facilitating the sorts of plant exchanges that we talked about, and providing a location for the kind of genteel botanizing that riveted British society in the late 18th century. I will stop there and pass back to James and let Nathan and Caroline and Sam take up the reins. Thanks very much.
Thank you, John. Thank you so much. And I think I remember the quote of a botanic garden being a resting place for plants to recoup, I think, for some time. Nathan, when you're ready, are you happy to come in and share your slides?
Yeah, I will see if it works. Is that viewing?
That's good.
Okay, great. Yeah.
Take it away.
Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks as well to James, sorry, Kiri and Sam for yeah, chance to kind of speak about some of the bits and bobs that I've been kind of recently kind of getting into with my work, and yeah, hopefully this should be in time, so we'll see. But let me begin. I also set a timer. So yeah, my talk is called Traditions and Technologies Uncontaining the West African Colonizer. I guess a bit more specific in comparison to John's talk, where I'll mainly be talking about one tree and plant product from this one tree. So located in the London Science Museums and medical galleries on level 1, among a myriad of other plant specimens, is a jar containing cola nuts. These cola nuts were collected by Sir Henry Wellcome at some point during the early 20th century. For decades, the cola nuts, which originate from the West African cola tree, have remained contained in this jar. And as you can see in the picture on the right, ground, deadened, and never used. Sir Henry Wellcome, who lived between 1853 and 1936, was an American-born British collector, traveller and entrepreneur who made his millions through his pharmaceutical business, Burroughs Wellcome and Co., which opened in London in 1880. In 1913, and with the success of his pharmaceutical business, Wellcome opened his first museum, the Wellcome Historical Medical Museum, a place he envisioned to display his ever-increasing collection, situated around his life's mission to reveal the great history of the art and science of healing, unquote. By the time of his death, Wellcome had amassed over 1 million objects from all across the world. The extent of Wellcome's collection was due to the extent of his global network of agents, which was underpinned by the global reach of the British Empire. A noted proportion of Wellcome's collections were medicinal plant specimens, such as the cola nut. In tracing the provenance of another cola nut jar presently found in the Science Museum's collections in London, this flimsy card on the screen reveals that these cola nuts were first bought at a London auction house in January 1929 by a Mr. Gardiner, who was one of Wellcome's agents or collecting agents. Like many of the plant specimens collected, Wellcome initially bought this for his museum before his death, but it's likely that this jar of cola nuts was never displayed or used. So what was Wellcome's fascination with the cola nut, or was it just another miscellaneous plant specimen among the thousands collected by European imperial bioprospectors? To answer this, we need to understand some of the significances surrounding the cola nut in global history. In a sense, we need to uncontain, both physically and metaphorically, what has since been contained in contemporary Global North Museum displays and collections. The kola nut is a small, bitter-tasting fruit, often reddish or whitish in colour, found grown across Western African tropical forests. Since at least the 11th century, kola nuts have been of central importance to West African culture and trade. Consumed as a stimulant due to its high caffeine content, kola nuts have historically had many religious, social, economic, and medicinal uses, as well as serving as a symbol of unity and togetherness across Western African communities. During the early modern periods, Akan-speaking West Africans referred to the kola tree as the bisi tree. In 1725, the Anglo-Irish collector and physician Hans Sloane noted in his publication Voyage that kola trees he saw growing in Jamaica had come from kola seeds, which had been transported across the Atlantic alongside enslaved Akan-speaking West Africans. Enslaved Akan-speaking Africans in Jamaica referred to the bisi tree as bichi tree, displaying the ongoing diasporic connections over time and geography. And this is some work that one of my colleagues, Chantel George, has been doing, some really fascinating work. Between the late 18th and early 20th centuries, the West African Ashanti Kingdom dominated the production and trade of kola nuts, selling to neighboring African regions and also Jew Muslims from the north. For Europeans, the medicinal properties of kola nuts were its most appealing aspect, the medical knowledge of which had mostly come from indigenous West Africans themselves. For example, in the 1850s, kola nuts were being displayed in Kew Gardens Museum of Economic Botany in room 1, case number 6. The museum's guidebook notes that, quote, "The seeds have a pleasant, bitter taste and are much esteemed by the Negroes as promoting digestion. Kola nuts also prevent sleep and are used by the watchmen to keep themselves awake. Powdered kola is applied to wounds or cuts," unquote. Somewhat unsurprisingly, by the 1880s, European and American interests in exploiting the kola nut for commercial gain surged as the scramble for Africa took shape. Kola nuts were increasingly shipped from West African coastal ports, subjected to pharmacological testing, and eventually sold as part of various commercial health products. Perhaps most famously, John Pemberton, the American pharmacist and inventor of Coca-Cola in the 1880s, utilized kola nut extracts as one of 2 core ingredients in the original recipe, in the original Coca-Cola recipe. In fact, the cola in Coca-Cola comes from the use of kola nuts. Across the Atlantic, Sir Henry Wellcome had also caught wind of the kola nut's medicinal economic potential by the early 1880s, and was then at work testing and developing his own commercial health product. By around 1890, Wellcome took to the market with his new forced march tablets, made with kola nut extracts, which, as he advertised it, allayed hunger and prolonged the power of endurance. Both Coca-Cola and forced march provided Pemberton and Wellcome with significant profits, yet no compensation was given to the various West African peoples from whom the plants and knowledge surrounding the plants originally derived from. With the decline of empire and rise of international bodies such as the WHO and UN during the 20th century, modern laws such as the 2014 Nagoya Protocol have been put into place to regulate for the fair and benefits sharing of any region's biological diversity, particularly for global South regions who have historically been unfairly exploited. But despite the fact that in the Western world, the kola nut is an all but forgotten museum specimen, in West Africa, the various cultures surrounding the kola tree and kola nut have never died out. Taking Nigeria as a key example today, Nigeria is the largest producer of kola nuts, and the kola nuts remain highly important in Igbo traditional religious and ritual practices. Beyond its cultural and religious significance, Nigerian scientists such as Professor Agbaje Lateef and his team at Ladoke Akintola University of Technology have been pioneering fruitful research since 2015 into the eco-friendly uses of the waste products created by the production and consumption of kola nuts. In uncontaining the kola nut through historical analysis, we can continue to gain a better understanding of the non-European cultures and knowledges which shaped European interaction with the product. But we can also come to understand how West Africans have never lost their primary connection to the tree and its product, and how they are continuing today to lead in bringing new knowledge to light about the kola nut. Thank you for listening. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nathan. That's really great, and I'm learning a lot about the kola nut there. So maybe we'll come back to some of that a bit later. I'll just invite Caroline to turn on her camera and share her slides. And just before she starts, just a reminder to everyone that if you want to ask a question of any of our speakers, there is a Q&A function which you should be able to see at the top. And you can start popping your questions in there whenever you want. You don't have to wait till the end. But I will hand over to Caroline, since it looks like she's more or less ready.
More or less. Yes, there we go.
Well, we can see you on presenter view at the moment rather than for some reason.
Oh, is that right?
Wasn't doing that last time, sorry.
No, it wasn't. Why might that be? Well, I'll stop sharing. I'll try a couple of things and see if we can do this again. See if this goes any better.
That looks better.
Ah, excellent. Okay, cool.
Perfect.
All right. Thanks, James, and thanks also to Kiri and Sam for inviting me to speak at this webinar today. My title has changed very slightly to Captive Labour and the Botanic Garden, and I'll explain the reasons why as I go through this talk. Of slavery and slavery's successor indentured labour in the history of economic botany and botanic gardens is fairly well documented, although there is always more to be done. From the 17th to the 20th century, and from the sugar plantations of the Caribbean to the rubber plantations of Southeast Asia, cheap labour was an integral element to the imperial botany formula. From the advent of Sir Joseph Banks as George III's botanical advisor at Kew in the 1770s to the mid-20th century, the Royal Botanic Gardens provided the botanical and horticultural expertise required to successfully mobilise so-called economic plants from their native habitats to monocultural estates within British colonial territories. However, I'm interested here in other forms of labour deployed in the pursuit of economic botany. And my methodology begins with objects themselves as sources, supported by collections, documentation and archival records. And so to demonstrate my approach today, I'm taking as an example a group of 19th century objects in Kew's economic botany collection. Has that changed for everyone? Yeah, cool. Okay. Fibres and cordage, and this of course is a direct quote from the records. These are not my own words. Fibres and cordage prepared by the inmates of the lunatic asylum Ceylon. So this object, EBC 43279, cord made from the fibre of Ficus altissimus, consists of a length of plant fibre twined into rope at one end and partially woven at the other. And it's arguably among the more modest of the 100,000 objects to be found in the economic botany collection at Kew. However, unravelling it, both literally and metaphorically, offers us an insight into forms of coerced and captive labour which are entangled in the histories of economic botany and botanic gardens. For as we unfurl the fibres, we can see here a printed label, a printed museum label bearing the words "made by the inmates of the lunatic asylum Ceylon," a documentary trace of the object's prior life. And further evidence of this past life is provided when we turn the object over and find a handwritten label on the underside, giving an alternative Latin name for the plant source, as well as two Asian names, one in Sinhalese, which at the time was the official language of Ceylon or Sri Lanka, and one in Malay. Oh, sorry, gone on too far. There we go. The specimen is one of 21, which remained from an accession of 43 fibres into Kew's Museum of Economic Botany in January 1874. And they came to Kew via the Vienna Universal Exhibition of 1873, as this entry in the museum's accession register shows. You can see there. And they had been amassed and submitted to that exhibition by Ceylon resident William Ferguson. And we know this through letters sent by Ferguson to Joseph Hooker, which can be found in Kew's director's correspondence. So here you can see that in May 1874, writing as a commissioner in Ceylon for the Vienna exhibition, Ferguson informs Hooker that 2 glass cases exhibited at Vienna containing fibres from the lunatic asylum would go to the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew at the exhibition's close. And now Ferguson was a surveyor in the Ceylon Civil Service, but of course also a keen naturalist, and he was particularly interested in botany, and he exchanged letters and specimens with a network of botanists, including Joseph Hooker at the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew. And there are more than 80 letters from Ferguson, many to Hooker, preserved in Kew's archives. And to give a sense of the strength of the professional and personal association between Ferguson and Joseph Hooker, Hooker named a Ceylonese shrub genus, Fergusonia, in his honour. So here in the centre, you can see the type specimen of Fergusonia zeylanica from Kew's herbarium collection. And here on the right, the plate containing accompanying the description of this species in the Kew publication Icones Plantarum in 1876. So you can see how I'm working across different sorts of collections to build a picture behind this object. Okay. Also in the director's correspondence is this article from the Ceylon Observer, which tells of a meeting of the Asiatic Society of Colombo in 1861. This meeting featured a display of Ceylonese products, including living plants and fibres produced at local bazaars. And apart from Ferguson, other contributors included the Reverend J. Thurston from the Industrial School, the Reverend Mr. Boak, Mr. Wamby from the Lunatic Asylum, and Green from the Walikadi Jail. And this shows the extent, I think, to which economic botany was of interest to colonial residents from all walks of life. But it also reveals Ferguson embedded in a network of disciplinary and penal institutions. But what about the labour which produced the specimens? What do we know about the lunatic asylum and its inmates? Well, at this stage, the search goes beyond Kew sources to published records in other archives and to secondary literature. So we know that the asylum was designed for Ceylonese patients and was established by the British government at Barella in 1847. And the intent appears, on the surface at least, to have been a liberal one. So in 1839, the governor of Ceylon, Sir James Stuart Mackenzie, reported to council that, quote, the cases of distress and misery from time to time brought to the notice of government prove beyond a doubt that the time has arrived when it's become imperative for the protection of those unfortunate persons, and in some cases also for their maintenance and support. But was the work undertaken at the asylum curative for the inmates or remunerative for the asylum? Occupational therapy, although it didn't go by this name, was an important part of the asylum system in the 19th century. But the institutionalization of mental illness on a progressively larger scale was expensive, and an emphasis on work for patients became a way of lowering running costs. And I think it's noteworthy that by the mid-19th century, the annual reports of some asylums had separate columns showing profits earned during the year. So by a stroke of the pen, therapy might equally be construed as labour. At Kew, the fibres were separated out. I need to go one more there. No, I'm sorry, I'm going to go back. At Kew, the fibres were separated out and displayed in museums 1 and 2, according to the plant family to which they belonged. Interest in fibres, I ought to say, was intense in the 19th century, as escalating demand for rope and sacking principally meant that alternatives to hemp and flax were keenly sought. And it's significant that the fibres were presented to Kew in their raw condition and in the various stages of their preparation and manufacture. And you can see again from that excerpt here from the accession register that this detail was reprised by John Reader Jackson, the curator of the Kew Museum, when he accessioned the fibres. And he writes here, most of the specimens show the rough fibre and the manufactured rope. Now, that's significant because the museum aimed to display, in the words of its founder, William Hooker, the quote, the raw material and to a certain extent also the manufactured or prepared article, a display principle he elsewhere referred to as the illustrative series. And Hooker considered that the several stages of preparation should be collected, quote, not only as objects of curiosity, but because they exemplify the progress of art and science. Sorry. I think it's interesting to speculate on how Victorian audiences in the museum may have reacted to an object label, quote, prepared by the inmates of the Ceylon Lunatic Asylum. To me, the very existence of these museum labels suggests a normalized and normalizing view of such labour. In conclusion, I'd like to say that this short paper is part of a work in progress, and I certainly don't wish to suggest that such practices no longer exist anywhere in the world, or indeed that labour forms in asylums and houses of correction were driven purely by cynical motives. There were clearly also charitable and social motivations at work. But what I've tried to demonstrate is the interconnectivity in the 19th century between the complex of colonial disciplinary institutions on the one hand, botanic gardens, and the broader imperial project on the other. The legacy of this project lies in the collections of specimens and artifacts still held by botanic gardens and related institutions, and demonstrates the extent to which we are all forever entangled in our colonial past. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Caroline. And finally, we'll hand over to Sam.
Hello and thank you.
Karen, you're still sharing your screen at the moment, just so you know.
Great.
There we go.
Right. I am assuming everyone can see that.
Yep.
Lovely. Right, let's make sure this works. Right, here we go. So just to quickly introduce myself, James did a great job anyways, but I'm Sam Pegg, PhD student and digital humanities technician, and I'm the research assistant on the project Building Shared Understanding of Plant Records as Data Using Kew Gardens Historic Records. And to introduce this talk, my talk will be concerning the Royal Botanic Gardens Kew record books and is preliminary work, and should be stated that these are not the final findings of what I've been doing so far. So there is still a little bit more work to be done. But before we begin, I just wanted to warn everyone I am dyslexic, so if you come across any spag errors in my PowerPoints, this is me apologising in advance. But also part of that dyslexia alters how I process information. So if you ask a question and I don't quite answer it, please just send it to me in an email, and having time and seeing it and being able to actually think a bit more about my answer might wield the answer you're looking for. So moving on. So the Kew record books, Kiri spoke brilliantly about these already, so I'm going to try and whiz through this. So the work I was doing was on the Kew record books, and I was looking at ways in which we can speed up this transcription process of the records, and whether an alternative was viable to kind of manual transcription. So the Kew record books are a series of volumes that document herbarium specimens that arrived at Kew, designated inwards, or were sent around the world from Kew, designated outwards. The record books date from 1739 to around 1980s and are made up of recorded Latin plant names for herbarium specimens, where these specimens arrived from or went to, names of people involved with these specimens, along with other details that Kew staff at the time believed were pertinent to these volumes. Bam. So the digitization of these volumes. So there's 19 of these volumes are identified for digitization at some point, with the first Kew record book 1793 to 1809 available on the Biodiversity Heritage Library and found at the attached link. The volume was made available by the Travelling Plants Project, which was a National Archives funded testbed project and set out to transcribe, research and encode the first of Kew's goods in and out volumes, a vital but little known resource for the global history of plants. And one reason for the digitization of these records is to help improve their accessibility to the wider public, and marks an effort to allow for a critical examination and transparency of the colonial history of Kew. However, digitizing and transcribing and encoding one volume takes an extensive amount of labour and time, in this case achieved through enlisting volunteers, which is something that isn't easily maintained. So I'm going to quickly show you a bit about the Biodiversity Heritage Library. This is one of the earlier pages in the Kew record book, and this is part of the manual transcription that was provided. So a large part of making any of these records, and a lot of records more generally, accessible to the wider public often involves some effort in transcription. And the reasons why this may be is because older styles of handwriting can cause challenges in legibility, which means who can access and use these documents is narrowed considerably. It also ensures accurate recapturing of information, minimizing illegibility or assumptions and speculations, which can create new and inaccurate histories from what is actually included or recorded. It allows for information and the histories that are included to be expanded on with footnoted material, creating links across texts and histories that makes research and information more tangible or accessible. And it allows for metadata, which can aid in helping to distinguish the record from decontextualized information. However, it's important to realise that manual transcription is a laborious process. It takes time and expertise. These volumes, especially the earlier ones, are formed of a particular styles of cursive handwriting, and that isn't as easy to read as text on the screen or some modern styles of handwriting. Where our brain may find it easier to recognise words we already know, the herbarium specimens recorded in Latin forces us to work more on a letter-by-letter act of transcription rather than a word-by-word that we can use when we're familiar with the language we're dealing with. And the process of contextualising information and forming links between and across pages also takes a lot of time. So that brings us to a question. How can we potentially speed up the transcription process? Well, this is where a handy little tool called Transcribus comes along. So Transcribus is a handwritten text recognition tool that uses machine learning and AI. Transcribus is described as a tool that enables you to automatically recognize text easily, edit seamlessly, collaborate effortlessly, and even train your custom AI for digitizing and interpreting historical documents of any form. How Transcribus works is through a process of training your own models on a selection of ground truth pages. These pages are usually manually transcribed beforehand, which act as a basis for recognizing later pages. And the number of ground truth pages falls anywhere between 50 to 500, usually designated about 50 pages per individual hand. Transcribus, though, offers nearly 200 pre-trained models, which can speed up the manual transcription needed for creating ground truth, and can enhance and back your own models with a lot more training data to draw from. And it's these pre-trained models I will be drawing primarily from for the remainder of this talk. So in kind of benchmarking Transcribus, there was a process. So luckily, when I started as a research assistant, I had access to 400 pages of ground truth that already existed, thanks to the Travelling Plants project. And so the process of identifying the best model to use became the focus. To do this required a process of benchmarking, comparing the manual transcription that came from the Travelling Plants project with the character accuracy of Transcribus. But to do this, we first needed to whittle down the models we had access to, so that I could use my time more effectively. And so we filtered and identified these models using 3 criteria. The first one is focusing on English as a language for the model, because out of the list of available models, Latin models are very, very few, and because both English and Latin use the Latin alphabet. The models needed for handwritten text. The models needed to be used for handwritten text rather than printed, so that excluded quite a few models. And the centuries ideally needed to encompass the entire period of the records, so starting from the 18th century onwards. In filtering by these requirements, we identified 3 viable models, and they were the English Eagle, Transcribus English Handwriting M3, and the B2022 English model M4. And in order to benchmark these models then, we needed a way to capture a difference between the Transcribus transcription and the manual transcription. And this comparison was conducted using a free online Liebenstein distance calculator. And for those who don't know, the Liebenstein distance is the smallest number of edit operations required to transform one string into another. And these edit operations include insertions, deletions, and substitutions. So going back to Transcribus. So in an ideal world, I would have been able to just upload a Transcribus transcription and the manual transcription from the Travelling Plants, but there's some intricacies and some finessing I had to do first. So because Transcribus reads line by line, not word by word or even character by character, it means it changes the way in which I have to upload in the Liebenstein distance calculator the way in which lines are created. And that meant for Transcribus, Transcribus also has different recognition models that are used, and this means that there are 3 types, which are line recognition, table recognition, and handwriting recognition, and they're all separate models that you can train Transcribus on. And this is important because it highlights parts of the issues of using previously transcribed ground truth that wasn't intended for Transcribus. Because Transcribus is reading line by line, that means that the transcription is stored line by line, and that means that the which doesn't sync with how we intuitively write day to day, nor with how the manual transcription for the Travelling Plants project was created. We work normally within the confined pages of a border, which we can see is happening here, but on text, we can usually fit in a lot more words per line. And this is problematic because of the way that Liebenstein distance measures differences on a character level. I had to be in order to create a line symmetry between the 2 documents. It also meant I had to remove all the extra data, like abbreviations being expanded, references, and other good practices in transcription. So we go from this was the, oh, my mouse has disappeared. Where's that gone? I'm just going to point it out. And the picture on the very far left is the manual transcription that was done by Travelling Plants. And this middle image that should hopefully appear. There we go. This image that's just appeared now is the transcription that I've edited to be line by line synced, ready for that Liebenstein distance calculator. So another thing with Transcribus is that the processing and the process of finessing the manual transcription also required working with Transcribus for line and table recognition, because the record books you organize information in a tabular form, something which Transcribus struggles with. So line recognition does not prove too troublesome with a sinistrodextral line styles, continuous from left to right, something along the lines of here. It's continuous from one end to the other. And however, when we begin to introduce a tabular style, things begin to break down in Transcribus. This is because gaps in the same line are recognized as separate lines in Transcribus. Sometimes that's useful, sometimes not so much. These numbers here, 76, I'm just pulling out random ones, but the 76 should continue along this line here, but it doesn't. Transcribus continues to transcribe in an uninterrupted sinistrodextral style that works regardless of columns. There we go. This top line here just continues from left to right all of the way, which ignores the kind of column style that we're seeing in this page. And it also prioritizes the height of each line, meaning that even when lines are being broken into multiple sections, if one piece of handwriting starts higher, even though it's continuing from a previous, Transcribus will still number that line as sooner. The best example, I believe, is 5, 7, 6. So it should go 5, 6, 7, but Transcribus sees this 6 slightly higher than the 7, and so it's prioritized that as the next line, then the 7. So yes, and this makes calculating the kind of Lieberstein distance difficult, especially when we're doing that line by line analysis. So I had to adapt the manual transcription to the format of the Transcribus line by line style, as well as accounting for gaps and new lines, which, although not ideal, was the most time effective process for the benchmarking. So once I'd created a line-by-line replica and edited the manual transcription into similar line structure as Transcribus, I then used the Lieberstein distance to calculate character differences and similarities across the 3 available models. When we compare texts, we have the original text here on the left, which for me was the Transcribus produced transcription, and the target text on the right, which was the most correct translation that Transcribus could have achieved. And then when we click compare, we get something that looks like this. The left shows us everything that was added from the original text, and the right shows us everything that was removed. However, what's most telling are these figures at the top, which tell us the common and different percentages. So this one here and this one here. Immediately by uploading one page, granted one of the easiest pages to read, and using a model that Transcribus provided, we got a roughly 79% accuracy without me doing anything. That at first seems really reassuring, but we're going to have a look at those findings a little bit more now. So in these tables that I provided, red means it performed the worst of the 3 models we were benchmarking against, and green means it did the best. But before we begin that, I've also added a word similarity on top of the Lieberstein distance as another comparison factor. I've color-coded as a way to visually represent the data rather than reading a load of numbers to you. Unfortunately, the color code does use red and green, which may cause issues for someone. If anyone wants access to these tables at the end, please feel free to ask, and I will do a different color code that suits. But these were the 3 models, just reminding, I've abbreviated them slightly, is the B2022, the M3, and the English Eagle. So with B2022, it was the least successful of the 3 models, with 7 out of the 8 pages that I was using for benchmarking performing the worst. Unsurprising though, it is the oldest model that Transcribus offers out of the selection, and doesn't indicate that it's benefited from any of the advancements that other models may have access to. With the M3, it performed much better than the B2022, given a higher common character accuracy and word accuracy. Interestingly, though, it did perform much worse on page 7, something I will look into to try and figure out why. I'm not going to lie, there could be human error on this one. It's surprising. It's a page that doesn't indicate why it might be different, but I'm going to look into that. And then we have the English Eagle, which has by far performed the best, offering a 72.49% accuracy rate and a 50.8 word accuracy. So looking at these kind of benchmarking results across the board, by the way, this picture of the eagle is the image that the English Eagle uses when you click it. So I thought I'd include it as our winner. Across the board, the English Eagle was the most successful pre-trained model that Transcribus offers when dealing with the record books. With a 3.83 to 8.36 improvement on character accuracy over the previous 2 models, and a 4.16 to 9.59% improvement on word similarity. In theory, the English Eagle provides the most robust backbone to complement the training of the model for the Kew record books. Importantly, the English Eagle was also the most consistently accurate, and its average was not inflated by pages that do particularly well. This also highlights that there's some level of handwriting consistency, which is important with the Kew record books and when using Transcribus. However, while character accuracy is promising, word accuracy highlights issues, especially when we recognize that Transcribus usually recognizes numbers particularly well, boosting that word accuracy up quite a bit and skewing results. This highlights that some of the next steps in the work should be looking at what is causing issues within word recognition and how one might train a model to tackle those specific issues. There's a lot of words that end in a collection of letters, and that are one of the reasons why it fails to get the full word accuracy. And if we train a model focusing on those letters, well, that massively improves word accuracy is the theory behind it. So why does all this matter? Why does benchmarking Transcribus for a project, why does before you start using HTR, a process of benchmarking useful? Well, using HTR should not be a blind process. HTR being handwritten text recognition should not be a blind process, and nor should choosing which pre-trained model we use. When you begin working with Transcribus, benchmarking different models may help determine a good starting place, saving time and guesswork. It also helps justify your approach. Using pre-trained models can cut down the transcription time, but in some cases it can also add to it. With large multi-page projects like the record books, Transcribus has the potential to save days, if not more, if a model can be created using the first record book. However, some smaller projects may end up losing time, especially if there's great swaths of line recognition and table recognition required across pages. Manual transcription doesn't require this effort, and so just because HDR tools exist, it doesn't mean they are the answer for all projects. Benchmarking tools like Transcribus also allow us to validate its viability, especially as it can be seen as a cost versus time trade-off. Traveling plants benefited from volunteers, and so using Transcribus would have been an added cost to the project. However, not all the projects had that sort of support that Kew had during that period. So the process of benchmarking and recording how long these processes take and their success rates means we can compare results to manual transcription for validation of this approach. But it also makes us evaluate the process of digitization and transcription, whether manual or through the utilization of AI tools. HTR puts stress and requirements on the digitization process, altering it in different ways. We digitize differently depending on what purpose the digitization serves, and so benchmarking also begins to make us think more widely around that as well. So what's next in closing remarks? There's still a lot for me to learn from this process. I haven't learned everything there is to know about Transcribus, and there's still a lot of information that I'm hoping to extract from this benchmark exercise in benchmarking. But when we begin to look towards the models and seeing where difficulties in transcription exists, and I can begin to kind of hypothesize why this may be. The start of words are more accurately transcribed than endings. I've had a moment chatting to Kiri where we think we might know why this is, but it'd be good to research, actually look into why this, what causes this. Why the removal of capitalization and punctuation increases accuracy. On the English Eagle, it's the only one I've managed to test, it increased accuracy by 3.49%, but more than 3%, definitely, but less than 4%. And it's whether that's a Transcribus issue or is that a transcription issue. In manual transcription, one of the things that can be missed is punctuation. And I know, or if you have a dyslexic doing it like me, they'll miss punctuation, which I did as well. How much recurring words endings affect accuracy when they are transcribed incorrectly from Transcribus's side of things. I spoke about that a bit earlier. So with roughly 8,000 to 9,000 pages needed transcribing, Transcribus could increase the speed in which these records are made available and accessible to the public. The key point is being accessible. It's very easy to kind of make these records available, but without that transcription, it actually still very much limits who can interact with these documents. But using HTR isn't a painless process. It still requires labor and some level of manual transcription to provide ground truth. So hopefully, if you're ever thinking about Transcribus for a project or you're interested in transcription more generally, there is a process of a bit of labor, a bit of kind of benchmarking, but it is really, really useful, and it's worth doing before you ever think that Transkribus will solve all your problems, because it might actually create some. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you for reminding us the value of the human eye in processing human-made records. Can I just invite our speakers to pop their cameras on so we can see them as a little bit of a panel? A reminder to all our audience that please put questions that you have into the Q&A, and somebody already has already. And just to answer one question already from Gillian, yes, this is a reminder, this is being recorded and will be posted afterwards. Thank you to all our speakers for telling us how the archival record of botanical speaks to labour, to localities, to medicinal knowledge, and about the complexity of using the archival record. What really struck me is the extent to which all of you spoke about kind of gestures to a kind of, I guess, a radical reshaping of global ecology and biodiversity during the long 19th century. And also the importance of telling local stories about that rather than just thinking about the global. So I wondered if, as a start, if any of our speakers would be interested in expanding on how their local examples and the plant mobilities around them help us better understand this kind of reshaping of global ecologies that was going on in this period, where, for example, the kola nut went and what happened to it when it got there, which isn't to say that Nathan has to start.
I can say something if you like, although I didn't focus on the ecological aspect in my presentation today. Clearly, I did make reference to the fact that typically the economic botany endeavour was about finding so-called useful plants all over the world, not just in British territories. Transplanting them often via Kew, where they were acclimatized and experiments of various sorts, undertaken, and then transported out to British colonial territories, where typically they were grown ultimately in these monocultures, these vast estates where there would just be a single plant species grown over miles and square miles. And of course, the implications of that were various and often ongoing. Large biodiverse areas in the destination, in the colonies, would need to be cleared to make way for these plantations. And secondly, there were human impacts in terms of people's living in these areas were often required to leave their ancestral lands and traditional types, ways of living. So that's a big picture. I don't know if anyone wants to talk in a little bit more granular detail about that.
I could pick up on that, Carolyn, a little bit. I'm not sure if I could talk in any more granular detail, but just thinking about the kind of question that James posed about the global and the local. And in many ways, it seems to me in this period, kind of the late 18th, but the long 19th century, as defined, the sort of a tension between thinking globally and also kind of acknowledging the kind of very local, particular, granular kind of levels of detail. So, I mean, I realized my paper might have sounded a little bit like I was saying people didn't need to worry about Kew and they were trying to bypass Kew. And obviously, as you said, Caroline, I mean, lots of plants are acclimatized at Kew. It is a kind of centre, but it is just one centre. And I think that's maybe kind of gesturing towards what James mentioned, that, in my field, certainly in the history of empire, centre and periphery is a kind of long standard but rather outdated terminology, and now we're kind of thinking about multiple centres, which is what I was trying to kind of gesture towards. So, for example, just to pick up on like a plant like the breadfruit plant, which maybe kind of popularly we associate with Tahiti, the South Pacific, that is then moved in this kind of grand global kind of scheme to the Caribbean in order to feed enslaved people in the Caribbean. Well, some of those kind of breadfruit plant end up growing on Centolina, and people are thinking about Centolina as a kind of place in which to acclimatise and grow plants, not just a breadfruit plant. So you've got this kind of global idea of moving plants and changing geologies and trying to kind of reshape geologies and botanies in order to kind of support the colonial project. But also you've got this very kind of localized where we've got to move plants between St. Vincent and Centolina, or we've got to think about what can be grown in the Cape or Ceylon, Sri Lanka, or whatever. So I think that's maybe my sitting on the proverbial fence. Maybe I should be sitting on the hedge, given the kind of theme that we're talking about here, but kind of thinking about this tension between local and global. Sorry if that doesn't answer your question, James, but it's the best I can do.
No, that's great. Thank you. I'm going to go to the questions in the chat because they've started to come in, and I got a specific one here for Nathan from Jessica Moody, which is, have you come across any references or discussion of the way the kola nut may have been used in ceremonial or commemorative ways in the collections museum records you've consulted? They asked this because it's been used in the 21st century by African elders in the Slavery Remembrance Day liberation ceremony in Liverpool.
Yeah, so there's a in a Pitt Rivers museum, they've got a kola nut bowl, which is quite interesting, which yet to kind of do a bit more work on actually. But there's some interesting stuff to do, and particularly kind of Igbo culture in southern eastern Nigeria, which is kind of, I'd say, they've had a significant kind of connection to the kola nut historically, and that remains today, as compared with most other parts of West Africa. And so this kola nut bowl is sort of a ritual bowl, and it was used historically, collected by Mervyn Jeffreys, who was an anthropologist, colonial kind of anthropologist in Nigeria mainly. And yeah, the record, I mean, there's not much information on it, to be honest. And it's, again, you know, kind of typical thing of barely any information on the records. But it does seem to kind of signal that the kola nut bowl was used for various kind of traditional religious purposes, and also for kind of welcoming your guests into your house, that type of stuff. And you could put kind of on this bowl various products, let's say kola nuts and other bits and bobs, which kind of were a symbol of kind of community or just welcoming, those types of things. So there certainly are, but not many, partly because I think this is partly the issue in that Europeans were mostly interested in the medicinal properties, and so much of the religious focus is actually just removed, like it's virtually completely removed, and it's more about what, you know, medicinal uses did you know, West Africans have for this, and that's what's kind of taken up in Europe by the 1880s. So it is somewhat difficult to find in records, but there are definitely some there, and it's definitely something I'm actually really interested in looking into more.
Thank you so much, Nathan. I'm going to hand over to a question for John from Brad Scott, who asked, did Roxburgh and Sir George Young have a sense of the extent of plant exchanges occurring at the Cape from the 17th century onwards?
Great. Thanks, James. Thanks, Brad. Good question. This is a short answer, which is, I think they probably did. Slightly longer answer coming up, so apologies for this. But so Roxburgh and Sir George Young are two very different people. So Roxburgh is a man of science. He's definitely, you know, he knows about plant exchanges within India, the Indian subcontinent, between British territories and kind of local rulers. He's absolutely aware of the French and the kind of Dutch in and around the Indian Ocean world, so he will be aware of that, I'm sure. So George Young is a martinet, they would call it, in the 18th and 19th century. He's kind of a colonial governor. He's an MP. I'm not sure if he's quite up to speed on the history of science in the same way science as Roxburgh would be, but I'm sure he's aware of it. And some of the phrases around the kind of dilapidation of the company gardens in the late 18th century, the Dutch East India Company Gardens, is because they're not expecting it to be as dilapidated, and they're kind of surprised to find that. And there are people moving in and around the Cape that, you know, sort of exchanging plants with other parts of the Indian Ocean world, whether it's Dutch Batavia or French Ile-de-France or whatever, that are aware of these networks. So at a broader point, kind of I think Brad's question kind of alludes to, is the fact that I was very much talking about connections between kind of British territories in India, the Cape, and London, because that's what some of the records were telling me, and a kind of little bit of case study that I could do. But actually, there's a much broader point here, which is that direct plant exchanges between the boundaries between empires are porous, I think, and there's much more exchange and of scientific knowledge as well as specimens between kind of empires and locations than perhaps historians have given credit for in the past. But yeah, I hope that kind of answers your question, Brad.
And can I just ask a quick follow-up in relation to the word "the Cape" which you
Yeah.
use? Because I'm just like, when you mentioned your sort of genteel folk kind of roaming out from the Cape into wider areas to kind of
Yeah.
explore for plants, it made me think about what is the sort of the imagined geography of the Cape at this time in relation to the wider Western Cape. How far are we talking these people are roaming on their sort of day trip to find plants?
Yeah, that's a good question, James. Well picked up. I mean, I think it's sort of that Cape, that tiny kind of Cape of Good Hope Peninsula, I think. But obviously the kind of boundaries of the Cape Colony, what is, I guess, today's Western Cape, extends much, much further. But that doesn't happen until the middle of the 19th century. And even then, I mean, the boundaries and the borders are not fixed until the later part of the 19th century. So when we're talking about rambling around the Cape, we're talking about Cape Town, Simonstown. I mean, for those on the call that kind of are familiar with this geography, beyond Table Mountain into Kirstenbosch, where the botanical gardens are today, and not much further beyond that. I don't think. There may be other kind of experts or kind of scientific travellers who will maybe go a little bit beyond that, but the genteel travellers, so to speak, such as maybe Anne Barnard and the like, they're not swinging too many miles or too many kilometres from that locus.
Thank you so much. And while we're on questions that I was thinking while you were speaking, I've got a quick question for Caroline as well, which is you obviously mentioned people, and you mentioned people we know very little about, and you mentioned Vienna, for example. But I did wonder how close do the records get to helping us know who some of these labourers were who were preparing some of these materials, that even if it's just a sense of their numbers and their backgrounds, or is this a totally kind of absent area in the record, these kind of little notes that we get inside objects telling us they were made by people at an asylum? Is that all we have ultimately for most of these collections?
Yeah, good. Thank you. That's a good question, and it does depend. I think in the instance I presented today, yes, very, very little information about who these people were, the actual people who produced the specimens. But in other contexts, so I've been looking, for example, at convict labourers that were brought in to grow cinchona in Southeast India in the 1860s. These were Chinese people predominantly who were captured in the Second Opium War. We don't know. In the records I've looked at, there isn't much in the way of individual names, but there is lots of information on numbers in that instance, and because they're within the penal system, I think they're quite well documented in terms of their movements, where they were before, how many came, and when they left. At the same time, anecdotally, from some of the correspondence, we do know that at the end of their term, and those convicts that I'm now referring to were on a 5-year term there, we do know that some of them chose to stay and be employed and paid at the same work, and that some of them actually did settle and marry local women. And there are instances on the web of their descendants who've traced their histories back to fathers who were working on the cinchona plantations as convicts. So it varies, I think, is the ultimate answer, but sometimes you get more than other cases.
Thank you so much. I'm just going to now go to a few different questions that we have for Sam and try and pull some of them together. So first, it's really lovely to know there's some people from the Travelling Plants Project here in the webinar, which is really lovely. And I think there's a couple of things going on the questions to you, Sam. I think there's some questions about whether or not focusing on specific keywords, maybe those of plants, might be a useful approach in terms of extracting the things that researchers are more interested in. There's also some questions here, I think, about whether or not, given that archival records like these are produced by many hands, whether we almost need different models every time there's different hand coming along. And there's also sort of a bit of a conversation going on about sort of word endings and the way in which people trail off in the archival record, which I'm sure we've all encountered, those of us who work with archival records. I wondered if you would able to respond to a few different bits of those, because I suspect they're all things you've been thinking about the last few months.
Yeah, so on the word endings question, I'm going to work backwards, promise slightly. On the word endings question, that was something that Kiri and I spoke about briefly, and we do think it is likely that when we use our handwriting, we start off a word kind of really nicely, and then as we get towards the end of the word, it's almost like we just want to hurry up and finish it. And we do that repeatedly for our words. And so actually what we're seeing is this kind of idea that the words are trailing off. What's interesting though is even though that effect of trailing off is happening, it's still in a pattern that transcribers can recognize. So if there's a combination of letters, even though that at the end of a word, even though they've trailed off multiple times, if those combination of letters repeat, transcribers usually, not all the time, but usually will still suggest the same 3 letters or same 2 letters. So that tells us that even though we are likely trailing off from the word, that actually there's still some uniformity, there's still some pattern in the way that we kind of have our words trail off. On one of the other questions, I'm going to be honest, I forgot one of the questions, but I'll figure it out. On the other question about can we train models on specific words, in theory yes, but there is a problem with that, especially with transcribus, because it kind of draws back to this transcribus. You train it line by line, and so if you wanted to train it for a specific word, you'd either have to go through a process of only recognizing that word in a load of documents, or you'd have to basically transcribe each, when you start doing the manual transcription for the ground truth, you'd have to start with that entire line that word appears in. And then you're going to get a load of jumble, because then transcribus, when you do the line recognition for the rest of the entirety of the rest of the document, it's going to try and recognize, and then using only those words that you've manually transcribed as ground truth, it's going to try and piece together what the entirety of the document is saying. So I'd probably say it's probably not the best way of doing it. But with transcribus, if you're going about transcribing the whole document, the idea is it's providing these text files that are encoded, because then it becomes searchable. And that's what kind of marks really good transcription, is this idea that we can search keywords. And I think that's a big part of what Kew want to be made available, made accessible to people, is the idea that you're not just scrolling through 400 pages. If you have a piece of information that you suspect might be in the record books, if you can just Command F, search a word, and it pops up, that's really, really valuable, especially as research in general is a very time-consuming process. Any way in which we can speed that up. James, there was the middle question you asked, but I've completely forgotten it.
That's just the one about multiple hands and the way in which it deals with multiple hands.
Yes, so with multiple hands, this is something that we're very, very aware of. So the first inwards volume that I was working with, it is really, really inconsistent. So that's one of the reasons why we're getting a disparity in percentages. It's not always about this kind of table and line recognition problem that we're having. It's sometimes just that the hands are different. And transcribus very much so is based, they encourage you to try and use hands or documents that were compiled at the same time, because handwriting styles change massively over time, and even just a few years can cause changes in style, and so it is one of those ideas that there is a potential that we could create this lovely inwards volume. Say we made a model based on this inwards volume. For some of the earlier volumes in inwards and outwards, it might work really, really well, but as we get to later models and that handwriting style changes massively, it might cause problems. It's something that there is work that needs to be done in. But the good thing is like a lot of the pre-trained models that transcribus are already offering, is they're not like specific 10 year, 20, 30 year. They're proving that actually the English Eagle goes, I think, from 17th century to the 19th century. So it's proving that you can create models that encompass loads of different styles of handwriting over hundreds of years. So there is a viability in that. Obviously, these models probably have massive research fundings. They have huge amounts of data and manual transcriptions of ground truth added to them. But one of the good things is if you're preparing for that kind of manual transcription process, and if you notice the hand is different, actually one of the models that you might have had success with earlier on might not be as successful, but it might mean that a different model might be more successful. So this is why this kind of benchmarking process I think is really, really important, because it's not just about going into Transcribus going, we're going to use AI to transcribe our documents. I think there is an element that needs to be kind of sat down, playing around with it and thinking, is this viable? Because for some people, they might kind of wedge themselves into this idea of using Transcribus, and it might not actually be suitable for what you want, especially if you're not working with a fair amounts of consistent pages. There are some projects that I would say, I don't want to put a page number on it, but there are some projects that you don't have enough pages to really justify using Transcribus, because by the time you've provided the 50 pages of ground truth, you've probably going to still need to do more work checking that ground truth, and actually probably isn't going to save you much time. Hopefully that answers all the questions.
Sorry,
Thanks,
Sam.
Sam.
I just had a quick follow-up question, if I may, if that's okay. So I thought you made a really interesting point about, in some cases, it being more time-consuming to use Transcribus rather than using volunteers. What was your opinion of the records books? Do you think it would be worth persevering, or do you think it would actually be quicker just to get a bunch of volunteers like we did with travelling plans and have them transcribing it?
I think in the case of the records books, I'm no way going to give an authoritative answer saying you should do this. I think Transcribus could be a really useful tool. There's still going to be a lot of time and potentially money spent to get this Transcribus to work, but there is a cross purpose along the Kew record books. Is you're potentially, even if the Kew records books isn't a complete success, I know there was someone that kind of mentioned, oh, is there ideas for this to be extended across other documents within Kew, in the archive, sorry. And I think there is an element of that which we can basically say, okay, this model that we've trained on the records books, maybe it took a bit of time, maybe it wasn't a complete success, but actually what is it now doing for the rest of the archives in Kew? Could we use this model, repurpose it for other material in the archives, especially within time periods, especially that actually we can probably look at some of the archival material that Kew houses, and the way it's laid out, the column structure, the tables and stuff might expand across those documents. So I would be inclined to say using Transcribus for the Kew records books is going to be beneficial in some form. It's not going to be a waste of time. It's not going to be a wasted project. But I think it's not going to be a magical solution either. It's going to be intensive. It's going to require a lot of time and patience from different people. But I think what you'll be getting out of it is invaluable.
Thanks so much, Sam. And I think that connects a little bit with Rhonda's question about using GPT-4. And I know you tried those kind of approaches. And I think one of the benefits of Transcribus is it's kind of built by the community for the community. And it also, I think, ties in with Brad's question a little bit about timescales, aspirations, that this is all very much stuff that we are working on together over a period of time to figure out. I don't see any more questions in the chat, unless there are any going to rapidly appear, in which case I'm wondering if either Kiri or any of the panel have any questions for each other at this point.
Yeah, I have one for John, actually. John, I was wondering if you looked into the plants that were being sent to the Cape that they were trying to grow there. If you looked at that, what kind of things? I find it a bit mind-blowing that somewhere that's probably pretty biodiverse had stuff being sent there to try and grow other crops or fruits or whatever they were trying to grow.
Yeah, that's a good question, Kiri. I mean, I guess we're kind of the dichotomy between economic botany and kind of genteel or aesthetic or kind of decorative botany in a way. So the short answer to your question is I haven't really gone into the kind of botanical details of what they've been moving there, but obviously the Cape is this kind of victualling way station, as you will know only too well from a maritime perspective. The Dutch and then the British and the French and other parts of the Indian Ocean where they're looking for kind of stop-off stations to kind of pick up fruit and veg. So I think they're less interested from a kind of strategic or governmental or political perspective in the specifics of the Erica or the proteas or whatever you can get in the Cape or whatever kind of plants you could grow at the Cape from India, and more interested in kind of seeing what can be grown in these places in order to kind of basically revictual ships. So I think it's more about the economic end of things. And they're always looking for, this is a slightly different project, but they're always looking for hemp to make ropes and stuff like that along this southern African coast and a little bit, kind of into the 1810s and 1820s. So yeah, the short answer to your question is I think they're probably more interested in kind of finding spaces to grow stuff to revictual and resupply ships rather than kind of thinking about kind of decorative stuff. Yeah.
I had a little question for Caroline very quickly. My question is there kind of any evidence or talks about, especially within the asylum context, of people being almost there being this approach to not better people's health because of this labour that was being generated from them being inside these asylums? I didn't know if there was any process of that happening.
Yeah, there's a little bit that I've managed to find so far. I mean, the more I've looked into this particular case, the more I realise I have to go to Sri Lanka and get into the archives there. But yes, so I think when the asylum, the colonial asylum, I'm going to call it a movement. I don't necessarily mean it was centrally controlled. It came from Britain, and then it was adopted variously in different colonies. But certainly in the Sri Lankan case, the Ceylon case, it starts off where they are talking about rest. That what the inmates need is rest, and it's quite interesting how soon that turns to work as the cure for their various mental illnesses. So I think there is a sense of some recognition of the need, or the perceived need at least, to make these places remunerative, to sort of self-fund if at all possible. Yeah, it's definitely coming through. But Sam, I've got one for you. I was just about to say the same thing, but for you, when you're doing this work, to what extent do you find you're absorbing the actual information itself, or does that come into it?
It's a tricky one, because at first I initially want to say no, but then I kind of realized that actually there are words that you pick up, or there are people's names that I become very, very aware of. And it wasn't actually until someone in the talking today mentioned breadfruit, I believe it was, and it's actually one of the words that just kind of pinged in the back of my mind as actually being in one of those inwards volumes mentioned. And so I think there is like this kind of process of osmosis of information that's coming in. The only thing with the inwards volumes is that sometimes the information is quite abstract. It can just be lists of plants in Latin, and my brain just goes, you don't understand that. But especially in those kind of, there's correspondence, or it will be like received from on the voyage of blah blah blah, and actually some of that information is slowly seeping through, and it actually incites interest. I've never really considered botanical research or anything like that, but actually at the back of my mind, I'm like, there's untapped resources, and there's definitely a lot of interesting things that these record books could potentially show us and whatnot, and already are showing us, but hopefully opening it up as a resource to other people will be invaluable.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Can I ask a question? Sorry, James.
John,
just a quick question for Sam and Kiri. Just thinking about this, you just mentioned, Sam, this idea of like long lists of stuff in Latin, and I completely understand where you're coming from. But I just wonder, is there like a category similarity between the inward, kind of the letters inward, and kind of ship's musters and stuff like that? And this is not just because of the maritime connection, but I'm just wondering about the kind of category similarities between the kind of classic ship's muster and these kind of goods inwards stuff. Is there any kind of way that, is there a way of kind of harnessing work that other people have done on kind of like tax records or customs records or whatever to kind of train these pieces of software? I don't know. I just wondered what your thinking was on that, and is goods inward kind of this completely separate category, or does it have these kind of, does it have genetic traces, as it were, of other kinds of record keeping in the 18th and 19th century, if that makes any sort of sense?
Do you
I might have to hand over to you, Kieran.
Okay. We haven't kind of looked specifically at that aspect, but I think there probably are similarities, particularly in the earlier record books, where they're actually recording the Wardian cases. It will say, 10 Wardian cases and list the plants that were found within those Wardian cases. So I assume that would correspond with the kind of ship's musters and what they would have been carrying. It would be really interesting to see, what has been done, particularly in kind of terms of transcription and digitization of those records, and see if they could be matched up. Obviously, the ships are quite often mentioned again in the earlier books, and we have thought about the possibility of linking up with maybe Lloyd's or somewhere or the naval sources to just see if we could link up the ships' names and kind of plot the journeys and kind of where they stopped and such. I think that would be really, really interesting piece of research to do. We haven't really looked into yet. So much that could be done with this series of records. It's really rich, but so inaccessible at the moment. I think big issue.
And there's clerical conventions of fill down and things like that, which undoubtedly connect with other types of similar records. So yeah, I imagine that will be something that will be a next step. Can I ask Nathan a question? And I want to go back to your forced march, if I may, which you brought up as a kind of an example of, I guess, military, medicinal, but also kind of commercially medicinal technologies. And it of course is one of the examples which you showed where coca was combined with cola, but where the cola nut and the coca leaf were combined. And I'm just curious about the extent to which these two, which people in the Cornwall know about, I guess the coca more than more than the cola nut. But I wonder how quickly these two were kind of medicinally paired by those who were sort of taking the cola nut and reusing it, because I guess I'm interested because you spoke so eloquently about the ways in which sort of knowledge that came out of, say, the Ashanti communities about the medicinal properties of this nut were then taken and reused in various forms of colonial medicine, and yet at the same time it gets combined with a leaf that comes from another part of the world, and gets kind of joined together in things like a product like Coca-Cola and forced march. So I wonder if you could just say a little bit about how they kind of ended up coming together, and if that is just the primary use ultimately of the cola nut, or does it get used much more on its own within colonial medicine?
Yeah, I think it comes together with coca leaves around the same time. I mean, the reason for that in Africa, obviously because of the scramble for Africa, the cola nut is, well, again, I'm kind of continuing to kind of look into this and see kind of the other aspects in which it's kind of being used. So the cola nut is certainly used for, so this, yeah, I guess it's right to say that it's not the only thing that it's used for. This kind of connection with coca for products like Coca-Cola and the forced march tablet. But that's one of the things. I think it's also used in food products as well, like chocolates and stuff like that. And it's the idea is that it's supposed to be a significant versatile plant product that can be used for sort of a myriad of things. So sometimes it's advertised. Well, it's to be fair, it's advertised for all sorts of things for different purposes. As it gets a bit ludicrous to some degree. So it's I think it's definitely something that I'm definitely interested in looking more into. But its main purpose definitely tended to be the medicinal, but because it's also essentially a food product as well, I think it's used as a kind of a flavoring ingredient as well. For so chocolate and stuff like that. So so it kind of varies, I would say.
What sort of flavor does it have?
It's very bitter, basically.
Okay.
It's extremely bitter tasting, but it's one of those things. It's like a Marmite. I think it's you either like it or you don't. But in a lot of records, they tend, like colonial records of when they've gone to West Africa or something like that, or they've received a sample or something like that, they often tend to say that it has a bitter taste, but you grow to like it. And once you like it, then you can utilize it in various forms, in powder form, liquid form, so forth and so on, for whatever you want to use it for. So yeah, a bitter taste, but one that I think, I don't know, I mean, it's tough to answer why, because I have tried it. I can't say I like it, but again, across West Africa has always been a very popular thing in terms of taste wise, and clearly it was when it was transported to Europe as well. Otherwise, I don't think it would have been as popular as it was.
Thanks so much. It's not often that historical research takes in all the senses, including taste. And certainly not something we do in the archive. There are no more questions in the chat, and I'm going to suggest that unless there's any burning questions from our panel, that we draw this to a close. In which case, I'd like to thank John, Nathan, Caroline, Sam, and Kiri for their wonderful presentations today. Thank all our audience for joining us and for their wonderful questions. And I hope that we see some of you in future events, either those hosted by our colleagues at Kew or those hosted by us here at University of Southampton. So take care and enjoy the rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks
Bye,
all.
everyone.
Bye.